What happens when a black gas station worker pays for an elderly man's fuel and gets fired for it? Why did his coworker say, "Let's see if kindness pays your rent"? And who's the stranger knocking at his door that night, holding more than just $20? This is not just about injustice. It's about what happens when someone chooses to do right, no matter the cost. Like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The Alabama sun pressed down like judgment on the cracked concrete of the Eastwood gas station. Unrelenting, heavy, mean. Heat waves shimmered off the pumps as cars came and went in a slow, endless rhythm. Out on Pump 6, Darius Walker wiped sweat from his brow, his dark blue uniform clinging to his back like damp plastic. His name tag, bent at the corner, flashed briefly under the sun. Customers barely glanced at him. Just a swipe of the card, a half wave, and gone. Darius moved between cars with quiet efficiency, checking fluids, wiping windshields, offering a polite "need anything else?" That was mostly met with a grunt or nothing at all. No one asked how his day was. No one cared that his feet ached or that he hadn't eaten since sunrise. He was just the guy at the pump. Then he noticed the man at Pump 4. Older, white, mid-70s, neatly dressed but clearly rattled. He patted his coat pockets, then the glove box, then under the seat, panic built in his every motion. Damn it," the man mumbled, pulling out receipts and crumpled napkins. "It was here I had it." Darius stepped closer. "Sir, everything all right?" Before the man could answer, a voice sliced in, sharp and cold. "If he doesn't have money, that's not our problem," said Chad Mullen, leaning against the kiosk with his arms folded, tall, pale, smirking. "Guy probably does this every week." The old man flinched. I live just down the road. I must have left it at home. I can bring it back in 10 minutes. "Yeah, sure," Chad snorted. "Or you disappear. Then we're stuck with it." The man's face fell. His cheeks flushed red with something that looked a lot like shame. Darius's throat tightened. Without a word, he pulled out his wallet, peeled off a $20, and handed it to Chad. "That should cover it." Chad blinked, then grinned, mean and lazy. "Your funeral, Walker." He took the bill with exaggerated flair, stuffing it into the register. "Charity cases now, huh?" Darius didn't respond, just gave the old man a nod. "You're good, sir." The man looked at him, stunned. "I thank you. People don't do that anymore." Darius offered a tired smile. "Maybe they should." From the corner of his eye, he saw Chad step back toward the office, phone already in hand, and no one said a word, not the customers, not the cashier. Only the heat remained, thick and silent. Darius Walker didn't look like a man who complained. Broad shoulders carried more than just fuel canisters. They carried the weight of a family, a history, and 1,000 quiet disappointments he never spoke of. His eyes, deep brown and ringed with sleepless circles, didn't dart or plead. They simply watched, absorbed, endured. He worked 2 shifts most days, not because he was ambitious, not because he had some grand plan, but because his mother's arthritis had made walking across the kitchen a slow, painful battle. Because his daughter, Annalise, never once asked for anything fancy but still needed shoes that didn't squeak when she ran. Because life demanded more than what minimum wage had to offer. Darius didn't gamble, didn't drink, didn't daydream. He showed up. He lasted. That morning, before the sun had even touched the rooftops, he'd packed Annalise's lunch, helped his mother into her chair by the window, kissed both their cheeks, and whispered the same promise he'd made every day for the last 4 years. "I'll be back. I always come back." Now, standing under that cruel sun at Pump 4, Darius watched the old man's face crumble under Chad's words. It wasn't just embarrassment. There was something deeper there. A quiet fear of being treated like nothing. Of being mistaken for someone who meant to take instead of someone who simply forgot. Darius knew that feeling too well. He felt it every time a customer held their purse a little tighter, every time someone handed him cash without meeting his eye, every time management called him son, like his name wasn't stitched right there on his chest. And in that moment, a quiet war broke out inside him. He could stay silent. Let the man walk away with shame. Let Chad feel like he'd won something. Or he could interrupt it, even if it cost him something. The heat buzzed louder in his ears. Darius reached for his wallet. It wasn't a heroic moment. It wasn't loud or righteous. It was just the decision of a man who'd had enough of watching people be made small. It wasn't the first time Darius had watched someone's dignity unravel. He was 9 the day it happened. The pharmacy smelled like rubbing alcohol and lemon disinfectant, and the air conditioning buzzed so loud he could hear it over his mother's strained breathing. She clutched a paper bag of prescription bottles in one hand and held his wrist in the other. Her knuckles were swollen, fingers curled with pain, but she didn't complain. Not then. Not ever. At the counter, she'd placed 2 of the bottles down and quietly pushed the third aside. "We'll come back for this one next week," she murmured. The pharmacist, a bored man with glasses and no smile, didn't look up. "You sure? That's the anti-inflammatory." She nodded once, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure." Darius stood beside her, watching her face, the tight jaw, the slight tremble in her hand. He didn't understand the names on the bottles, but he understood the silence that followed. That kind of silence had weight. It was the silence of doing without. Then a rustle. A hand, white, older, calloused, appeared beside his mother, holding a folded $20 bill. "I got it," the man said. Gloria's eyes widened. "Sir, no, I can't. Doesn't matter." He slid the money forward. "Help when you can, even once, that's enough." He didn't wait for a thank you, just gave her a nod and walked out. That moment had burned itself into Darius's memory, clearer than any birthday or Christmas. Not because of the money, but because of the look on his mother's face. That someone had seen her. That someone had chosen kindness when the world so often chose to look away. For years afterward, he wondered about that man, who he was, why he did it. He never found out. But today, under the burning sun of Birmingham, as he handed Chad a worn $20 to save a stranger from humiliation, he didn't need a reason. He already had one. Help when you can, even once. That had always been enough. The heat hadn't let up. If anything, it had grown heavier, clinging to Darius like a second skin as he returned to the pumps. But something had shifted. The customers blurred into background noise. Even the rumble of engines faded. The only thing he heard clearly was the crackle of the overhead speaker. Darius Walker, manager's office, now. His chest tightened. Chad glanced up from where he leaned on the counter, a grin already playing at his lips. "Told you," he muttered, smug. "Should have let the old man walk." Darius didn't respond. He wiped his hands on his uniform, steadied his breath, and pushed through the back door into the narrow hallway that led to the office. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The hum matched the static building in his gut. Roger Parks was waiting behind a chipped desk stacked with folders and energy drink cans. Mid-40s, pale, thinning hair combed carefully. The kind of man who believed in order, but only when it was convenient. "Close the door," Roger said, not looking up. Darius obeyed. Roger didn't waste time. "Chad says you took money from the register to pay for someone's fuel." "I didn't," Darius said evenly. "I gave him a 20 from my wallet." Roger tapped a pen against the desk, slow and rhythmic. "That's not what he said. You can check the drawer. Every dollar's accounted for, and the cameras. I'm not pulling security footage for $20. Darius blinked. "Then what are we doing here?" Roger finally looked up, his eyes already tired of the conversation. "This isn't about the money, Darius. It's about protocol. You don't pay for people's fuel. You don't interfere. You follow the rules. Otherwise, we start looking like a charity. He was going to walk away humiliated. You made a call that wasn't yours to make. Roger pulled a folded form from the side drawer and slid it across the desk. A write-up. Termination notice already filled in. It's already done. Darius stared at the paper, his name in bold. The reason, violation of payment policy. Chad's words echoed in his head, oily and cruel. Let's see if kindness pays the rent. His jaw tightened. His fists clenched at his sides. But he didn't yell, didn't plead. He simply nodded once, turned on his heel, and walked out the door, not because he agreed, but because in that moment he knew arguing with men like Roger was like shouting into the wind. The sun was falling behind the rooftops when Darius stepped out of Eastwood Gas for the last time. The late-day air was cooler now, but it didn't bring relief. Just the dull ache of what had been lost. He didn't take the bus. He needed the walk. Each step echoed beneath his boots, steady but heavy. Around him, Birmingham stirred with its usual end-of-day hum, car horns in the distance, kids yelling as they chased each other down cracked sidewalks, a neighbor arguing with someone on speakerphone. Life, indifferent and unbothered, moved on. But in Darius's head, everything was quiet. It's already done. Let's see if kindness pays the rent. His shoulders tightened. By the time he reached his duplex, dusk had painted the porch in soft amber light. The bulb over the door flickered once, then steadied. He paused at the steps, took a breath, and pushed open the door. Warm air met him, cooked greens, cornbread, and lavender oil. "Daddy!" Annalise's voice rang out, and her small frame barreled toward him, arms open wide. He dropped his bag just in time to catch her. "You're early," she said with wide eyes. "Can we go to the park?" Darius forced a smile, brushing a hand through her curls. "Not tonight, baby." She didn't pout, just nodded and skipped toward the kitchen, but Gloria saw it. From her chair by the window, wrapped in a knit shawl, her gaze followed him as he moved through the room. He didn't have to say anything. She already knew. "What happened?" she asked, voice low and even. He sat down across from her, hands clasped, and he told her. Everything. Chad, the old man. The $20. Roger's cold finality. By the end, Gloria was quiet. Her fingers, gnarled from arthritis, folded slowly in her lap. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. "Being right," she said, "won't pay the bills, but it'll let you look your child in the eye." Darius swallowed. The weight in his chest lifted, but only slightly. Then came the knock. 3 slow, firm taps against the door, not urgent, but deliberate. Gloria's brow arched. "You expecting someone?" Darius stood. "No." And in his chest something shifted. Darius opened the door slowly. Standing under the porch light was the elderly man from earlier that day, Mr. Vernon Hale. The same beige jacket, the same steady eyes. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman in her 40s, elegant and composed. Her heels clicked softly on the wooden porch. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried herself like someone used to boardrooms and power. Her hair was pulled back, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Evening," Vernon said gently. "Told you I'd come back." Darius blinked, stunned. "Sir, please come in." He stepped aside. They entered without hesitation, the scent of expensive perfume trailing in behind them, clean, quiet, intentional. Gloria watched from her chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "These friends of yours, Darius." "Mama, this is Mr. Hale. I helped him earlier today." He turned to the woman. "And you are," she extended her hand. "Kendra Hale, Vernon's daughter, executive vice president at Blue Rock Energy." Darius's brow furrowed. He knew that name. Blue Rock was stamped on every fuel truck that came through Birmingham. They didn't just run gas stations. They controlled the supply chain. Vernon stepped forward, holding out a crisp, folded bill. "First, I owe you this." Darius shook his head. "You didn't need to come all this way for $20. I didn't, Vernon replied. This isn't about the money, it's about what you did when no one was watching. Kendra laid a black business card on the coffee table. The gold lettering shimmered under the light. Kendra Hale, EVP, Blue Rock Energy Group, we're opening a new flagship station on the north side, she said. And we need someone to manage it, someone we can trust. Darius blinked. You want me to run it? You'd start with training, she added. You'll earn it, but we think you have what it takes. He looked at her, then at Vernon, who simply nodded, hands folded behind his back like a man who didn't need to explain himself. Then Darius turned. His eyes landed on Gloria, who met his gaze without a word. Then to Analyze, now peeking from the hallway, clutching her drawing pad. He felt it then, the weight of what was lost that day and the glimpse of what could be rebuilt, a future, not just surviving, building. He looked back at Kendra and nodded once. All right, I'm in. She extended her hand again. This time Darius shook it without hesitation. Good, she said. Let's get to work. Monday morning came with pressed slacks and nerves. Darius stood outside the gleaming Blue Rock Energy corporate office, heart pounding beneath his button-down shirt. The glass building towered above him, sleek, modern, far from the oil-stained pavement he was used to. Inside, everything smelled like money and lemon polish. Polished floors, voices hushed but urgent. Suits moved like they belonged here. Darius didn't, not yet. Kendra met him in the lobby, crisp as ever, holding a folder with his name on it. You ready? She asked. No, he answered honestly. But I'm here, she smiled. That's enough for now. Training was brutal. Fuel logistics, invoicing, safety codes, payroll systems, terms he'd never heard, acronyms that blurred together. He studied until his head ached, taking notes on things like distributor contracts and EPA compliance. Carter Reynolds, a seasoned manager with a permanent scowl and steel gray mustache, led the field training. Managing ain't ordering people around, Carter barked on the first day. It's knowing their jobs better than they do and doing yours without excuses. So Darius did everything. Stocked shelves, balanced books, dealt with customers both kind and cruel, cleaned oil spills at 5:30 a.m., then reviewed vendor schedules at night. There were days he wanted to quit, but every time the doubt crept in, he remembered Gloria's words, "You do right even when it costs you." By week 3, something shifted. Numbers started to make sense. Conversations with staff felt smoother. He resolved a payment issue without calling for backup. Carter nodded once, which was the closest thing to praise he ever gave. Not bad, Walker, he muttered. Not bad at all. Back at Eastwood Gas, the whispers reached Chad's ears. You heard about Darius? One worker asked. Yeah, corporate picked him up, manager track or something. Chad scoffed. Man got lucky. One good deed and suddenly he's a hero. But his jaw clenched. He knew the truth. Darius didn't get lucky. He earned it. Weeks later, a photo made the rounds on Blue Rock's internal network, Darius standing proudly in front of the new Northside station, his badge gleaming, team behind him. The caption read, Our new station manager. He didn't climb the ladder, he built it. The post went viral within the company. Because in a world used to rewarding shortcuts, Darius Walker proved something timeless. Decency still mattered. And integrity could rise even from the pavement. The morning light crept softly across the floorboards as Darius buttoned his collar in front of the hallway mirror. Outside, Birmingham was still quiet, just birdsong and the distant rumble of a garbage truck rolling down the avenue. His shirt was crisp. His shoes shined. And on the left side of his chest, the badge caught the light. D. Walker Station Manager. He straightened it carefully, fingers lingering over the name. From the kitchen, Gloria watched with quiet pride, a steaming mug between her hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her eyes said it all. Footsteps padded down the hallway. Annalise, still in her pajamas, stood in the doorway holding a folded piece of paper. Her curls were wild from sleep and her smile was wide. "Wait," she whispered, running over. "Before you go." She pressed the paper into his palm. "You can't forget this." Darius knelt to her level and opened it. In bold crayon, the words stretched across the page, "My hero," with a drawing of him standing tall beside a gas station, a crown crooked over his head. His throat tightened. "You drew this," she nodded proudly, "because you help people, even when no one's looking." He pulled her into a hug, kissed the top of her head, and held her just a moment longer than usual. Then he stood, slipped the drawing into his pocket, and stepped onto the porch. The sun was just rising, soft gold spilling over the streets, turning everything quiet and new. Darius Walker wasn't rich, wasn't famous, had no headlines or applause waiting for him, but he had chosen not to walk away. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything.